Hi everyone, so CL Strife was asking another great question which I cannot but address. Even the question itself I thought was fascinating. She basically asked, what is it that makes people say that INFJs are stalkers? You've heard it, stalkers. So my first thought was, is it really the case that INFJs are perceived, at least often enough, to be stalkers? Like, this is not something that I've ever come across, right? So I have to trust that this is a thing. Maybe in the comments people can also share these experiences of having been told or it having been suggested to them, maybe in roundabout ways, that they are kind of stalkerish and that people are uncomfortable with that. Nevertheless, we're going to sort of do I'm going to perform a bit of an inductive leap. I'd assume that this is a general phenomenon, general enough to be talked, to be extrapolated from, if you like, even though it hasn't necessarily happened to me, at least not in a literal way. But I can certainly think of experiences where I have been told things that could be translated as "don't be a stalker" in some sense. So how would I try to sort of analyze it and parse it at first glance? I think that INFJs are not stalkers in a literal sense. They're not people who stalk. I don't know if that is something that has to do with personality type. It probably has to do with mental issues, perhaps particularly mental issues that have to do with various degrees of perversion. Having a displaced sexual nature. Of course, the perversion can be, sexually displaced onto a bunch of different things, including objects and fetishism, including voyeurism. That's not objects, but you know what I mean. Exhibitionism, and I guess stalking can be seen as something like that. At least that's one possible interpretation. Now that doesn't really. It's going to be true of very few INFJs in the same way that it will be true of very few INTJs or ISFPs and what have you. However, you could legitimately make a case that INFJs tend to be perceived by people who are not willing to take on their kind of interpersonal intensity as soul stalkers. I would say that INFJs, they're not soul stalkers, but they're really interested in seeing through you and straight into your soul. And insofar as the person might then walk away from the conversation feeling like they're still being seen through or analyzed by the INFJ even at a distance, they might feel as if they are being stalked. They're not going to phrase it in this way because it's not literally stalking, so it makes sense that they wouldn't phrase it in this way. But perhaps the kind of vocabulary that's used to talk about the phenomenon and the unpleasantness for the person, even if it's very, very largely unintentional on the part of the INFJ, it's not deliberate, could be sort of shown to have isomorphic traits in common with the phenomenon of stalking. But again, we'll be talking about a kind of abstract interpersonal stalking. Actually, not so abstract, but certainly difficult to pin down or put in words. Soul stalking, I think, is a good expression. How do you feel about that phrase, soul stalking? Now, in terms of conceptualization of this phenomenon with reference to my books, this has to have to do with what I call the phenomenon of haziness. Right? Haziness being one of the primordial existential modes of relating to others that the INFJ has as part of their existential makeup. I discuss this at length in the Ecstatic Soul, so if you want to know more about this, you can refer back to the link below to my book, The Ecstatic Soul, because you'll get to hear a lot more about what haziness involves and why it can manifest, perhaps in certain cases for other people, as soul stalking. I mean, the basic insight, the basic idea here is because INFJs have if you like, in a primordial sense, they experience a pretty deep feeling of alienation from external reality. And because the way that they get a grip on external reality, the way they hook onto external reality through the fact that their number one non-inferior extroverted function is FE, access to the social world, access to interpersonal relationships with other people, albeit very complex and layered in itself, is going to be invested with tremendous significance, because in a sense other people are the hook. They are the way through which SE is then going to be fed in very indirect ways to reassure the INFJ that they are indeed in the world. This feeling like they are in the world, not just physically but intellectually and emotionally and affectively, is going to be a challenge. And FE is going to be so important here that interpersonal relationships are going to be imbued with that sense of urgency. And haziness means that other people are in the first place kind of difficult to pin down for INFJs, because they are like the first data points that connect the NI world with external reality. And people don't like to feel like data points that are progressively drawn and sort of circumscribed, that their own contours are being, in the course of the very conversation, their own contours are being delineated. So the INFJ has a mode of not really knowing where they have to start from. It's hazy in that sense, and the path and the dynamics of the interaction are going to be leading towards less haziness. But that means that there's going to be quite a high level of intensive engagement, namely intensity. And a person might feel like they are just being subjected to a level of intensity they didn't ask for, and that they are being looked through in a way that might feel stalkerish. But like I said, it's more akin to soul stalking, for the INFJ to establish a more definite connection between their NI world and external reality through the social function that FE is, than actual stalking. But I have no doubt that this can translate into modes of behavior as perceived by other people that might be considered intrusive. And I think that many INFJs have been made to feel like they were being a little bit too socially intrusive or emotionally intrusive without meaning to. Because again, haziness is an existential mode. It's not conscious. It constitutes INFJs more than the INFJ constitutes the phenomenon. So let me know in the comments what you think, including CL Strife, what you thought of my response. Give me a like. I don't have the books with me here, so let me just remind you that if you want to hear more about this, The Ecstatic Soul, my first book on the INFJ, which is called A New Look at the INFJ Personality, is the deepest investigation of the INFJ mind and what it's like to be an INFJ, to go further into these topics. And the sequel to it, The Infinite Soul, my latest book, the first link is to The Infinite Soul. The two books go together, looks more at the interaction between the INFJ consciousness and external reality, and how INFJs can find happiness, peace, and contentment in the world. A world is often seen as hostile. So the two books go together, and they are together probably the deepest investigation of what it is to be an INFJ and the challenges that come with it. And don't forget, the lifeblood of my channel is my Patreon page. If you would like to support me on Patreon, please consider it. From $3.50 a month, you help me keep going with the channel, basically. And there's been more of you supporting me. This makes me really hopeful that there will be more of you coming my way. You get access to bonus content, you interact with me. The community is going really well, so consider it, and I'll talk to you next time, guys. Bye bye.